Right, my name is Rutendo Matinyarare. I'm the chairman of Zimbabwe Anti-Sanctions Movement, or ZASM, and I'm also the founder of Frontline Strat Marketing Consultancy. I'm a communicator by profession, I'm a marketer by profession, and I believe in building brands and telling stories. I believe that it's very important for us, especially as Africans, to tell our stories to the world, because the world is telling our stories and we are quiet. And this is why we continue to be undermined in the world. People continue to see us as people that do not have substance because they do not hear us telling our own stories. And one of the fundamental things that I've been telling people in business as Black people, African governments, including our own government, is that they've got to start telling the story. The hearts and minds of people are important. We've got to tell good stories about Africans to give our children and future generations hope. We've got to make Africans proud to be African. And the only way we can do that is by telling them good African stories that inspire them. We've got to have African heroes who are going to become the future of their dreams, who are going to become the inspiration and aspirations of these very same young people. And so that is why I'm in the business of telling stories. And we live in a world that doesn't want Africans to tell stories. We live in a world, I'm in South Africa right now, as a marketing consultancy in a very white-dominated environment. You can't tell stories. And even broadcasters and producers and film producers that are Black are not allowed to tell authentic Black stories. They're only allowed to tell the stories that make us look scandalous, that make us look as if we're people that don't know what we're doing. Our news reporters tell stories that are against and opposed to Africa. They portray us as people that don't know what we're doing. And this is part and parcel of why I exist, to try and change that narrative, to stop the stereotypes of Africans being disorganized and lacking in knowledge. Because I'm not disorganized, I don't lack in knowledge, I'm organized. And I believe there are many other Africans like that. And we should stop this nonsense of Africans believing that I'm the better African, I am not disorganized, everybody else is. Because it doesn't destroy only those that you're denigrating, it destroys you too. So that's part and parcel of the narrative that I want to drive. And I want to say to young people in Africa, you can do it, you are good, tell your story. So let's talk about this documentary, The Gold Mafia. What I find interesting about The Gold Mafia is the timing. First of all, with the timing is that you need to understand that just a day before the documentary was released, the United States government responded to our papers in the South African courts as the Zimbabwe Anti-Sanctions Movement. So we've been suing the American president, Secretary of State, OFAC, and a number of American dignitaries and leaders, and together with the banks that are operating or domicile here in South Africa. We are saying that the South African banks have been punishing Zimbabweans illegitimately. They have been instituting sanctions by blocking people's accounts, blocking payments, by cutting corresponding banking relationships, and actually closing people's accounts outright. They're closing individuals and companies' accounts. And by so doing, South Africa, being our biggest trading partner, makes it very difficult for Zimbabwe to trade when our biggest trading partner is closing our bank accounts and everything. We also cited the US president together with the Secretary of State because they are the ones that have written the rules to these executive orders that say that no company, no institution, no bank can clear the funds of Zimbabwe. No bank can give loans, no bank can make payments on behalf of the Zimbabwean government, its companies, and Zimbabweans without a license from the US president. It goes on further to say no company can give technology, software, logistics, assistance. That even means that NGOs are not allowed to assist Zimbabwe without a license from the US president or the Secretary of State. So what we are saying is that this very same US president has come into South Africa to talk to South African companies to say, you cannot do business with Zimbabwe, you cannot give them accounts, you cannot make payments for them on their behalf without my acceptance. And if you do, we will punish you with sanctions, we'll give you secondary sanctions, and we can even charge you criminally. So by so doing, they're forcing companies that operate in South Africa under South African law to break South African law for the benefit and the purpose of US interests. Now, it's then interesting that when they give us papers responding to that, where the US President and Secretary of State are saying, we are pleading for immunity. And they're pleading for immunity, which generally under the Vienna Convention and international rules, a person gets immunity as a diplomat on the pretext that they do not intentionally undertake crimes when they know for a fact that they have diplomatic immunity. The American president and the Secretary of State are deliberately committing crimes to get people's bank accounts closed so that they can plead immunity. And that is absolutely wrong in my books. And then they bring out this documentary, a documentary that is scandalizing business people and some of the biggest investors in the country. They're scandalizing dealers of a very important resource in Zimbabwe, which is gold. And these investors and this gold is what we're using to bust sanctions in Zimbabwe. And they are targeting that with this documentary, with the intention of targeting the investors in Zimbabwe's gold. They want to ban Zimbabwe's gold from the international market. And they also want to use anti-money laundering laws and counter-terrorism laws to block the accounts and to do what we call non-prosecutorial seizures of the properties of some of the people that we hear having their names spoken about. So you've got people like Pastor Hubert Angel, you have got Rutland, who's being spoken about, and you've got the lady that is responsible for driving the biggest gold production in that she manages the federation that manages our artisanal miners, and that's Harriet Rishwai. And they're also going after the president. These are critical players in our economy. Critical players in our economy in that they are decision makers, they are the diplomats, and some of them are the investors. And with someone like Henrietta Ishwaya, they are driving the industry that is actually busting sanctions for Zimbabwe. And the documentary is trying to target that. It's trying to target these people. It's trying to force the South African government, which is under the Financial Action Task Force grey list, to start investigating some of the people that are mentioned in this documentary. But the documentary is tailored to influence judges, investigators, the authorities of South Africa to push them into investigating. Why are they going to be pushed into investigating? It is because part and parcel of the report that got South Africa on the grey list that was issued in 2021 said that South Africa is not investigating money laundering and the financing of terrorism enough. They are not using the discretion that they're given by the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations, which means you can actually have banks flag a person as money laundering, block their accounts without any convictions of the court and without any court rulings or what we call declarations of the court. They do not need a court order to close people's accounts. And I believe that this documentary, coming out a day after the United States answers to our papers, where we are challenging banks for closing people's accounts without trial, is exactly the United States trying to pressure the judges of this country, the people in the finance sector, banks, to close the accounts of the people that have been implicated and to start investigating them for money laundering. I believe that as Zimbabweans, it's very important for us to stop this arbitrariness and this lack of rule of law. We live in a rule-based system that says that a person needs to be tried and they need to be found guilty first before they can be punished for any crime. Currently, with what we're seeing, the use of documentaries, the use of lies and falsehoods, fake media being used to target people, to create a court of public opinion that then gets people's bank accounts closed, is something that we saw happening to the Guptas. We also saw the same thing happening to Iqbal Survey, but fortunately for Iqbal Survey, who is the owner of Sekunjalo that wanted to create a black bank in South Africa, he fortunately decided to take it to the Equality Court, and the Equality Court ruled that it was illegal for the banks, especially Nedbank, to close his bank accounts because of allegations that have been made in a commission of inquiry for that matter. So this scandalizing of either black business people or white business people that are helping and investing in African countries scandalizing them with the intention to target them and to close their bank accounts extrajudicially without trial, in the same way that Zimbabweans are being punished by sanctions without trial, is the agenda of Al Jazeera, and it is something that we as Africans must fight. African leaders in Zimbabwe, South Africa, SADC, and the AU must campaign against the utilization of banks as a means to sanction people under the disguise of stopping money laundering or terrorism. According to the Financial Action Task Force's own rules, the only person that can be designated as a money launderer or as somebody that finances terrorism is somebody that has been designated by the United Nations Security Council. That means that all the banks that de-risk and start closing people's accounts on the basis of allegations and no trials are doing something illegal according to the Financial Action Task Force's own rules. So it is very important that African leaders have got to stop looking at banks that continue to close people's bank accounts. We also have to tell African leaders that if they can close the bank accounts of companies, they can definitely close your own bank accounts when you do something that they don't like. When you investigate the United States, for instance, in the ICJ, for crimes against humanity, for war crimes in Afghanistan, for war crimes in Iraq, the Americans will threaten and ask banks to close your account. That is wrong. And we must also remember, we must also remember that when we had Glencore being found guilty for taking large amounts of money throughout the continent and bribing leaders, and they pled guilty in US courts and the British court, we never saw a single bank in South Africa or anywhere in the world closing Glencore's bank accounts because of money laundering. Yet they were clearly money laundering. They were carrying millions of rands, millions of dollars on jets, taking it throughout the world, bribing. That is money laundering. A lot of these mining companies are money laundering by the fact that they're holding on to mining rights that they got during colonialism. They're exploiting labor. They've been perpetuating crimes like apartheid in South Africa, and they've taken money out of these destinations where they were perpetuating colonialism and apartheid, these crimes against humanity, and they were able to bank them in banks overseas. That is money laundering. But we never see money laundering affecting Europeans. The banks that finance terrorism in the Middle East, the terrorists are using weapons from America. They're paying for those weapons through American banks, European banks, and they never get said to be money laundering. We need to be very, very, very careful. And I think it's very interesting that they've scandalized a number of people. We saw Pastor Hubert Angel being portrayed as some crook, a crook that wants to launder money for some people from Hong Kong. But we don't know that these people from Hong Kong exist. We do not know that these people from Hong Kong have perpetuated a predicate crime. And I'll explain what I mean. For there to be money laundering, there has to be a criminal activity that has happened, that has created profits from a dirty activity, selling drugs, human trafficking, stealing, or any other crime. That is called a predicate crime. That predicate crime is what then causes somebody to want to put their money into the normal system by cleaning their money. I never heard Pastor Angel promising to clean any dirty money. I heard a lot of editing of his voice and what it is that he was saying, and it being made to say something that I don't think he was necessarily saying. That is manipulation. But why would they manipulate a man of God? Why would they manipulate a pastor? And then, of course, people have been asking the question, but why did he say that he can actually put $1 billion onto a plane and then walk out with a bag as a diplomat? Truth of the matter is that credible? Does that make sense? Pastor Angel is somebody who's got money. He's somebody that has got wealth. He would definitely know what $1 billion is. And so when he says something like that, surely he was either playing a game or he was testing the people that were sitting up across from him. It doesn't make sense that Pastor Angel actually believes that he could hold $1 billion in a bag. But he said it. And those other people took that thing that he said, and clearly they exposed themselves for being what they were not. If they were really billionaires from Hong Kong, they should have known that $1 billion would not fit in a bank, and they should have raised that. But I don't believe that a whole nation has got to judge people based on a few seconds of edited content. I'm speaking to you right now. What I'm saying can be turned into meaning anything other than what I'm saying, especially when it is edited. That is why such content cannot even be used in a court of law, because the editing of content can make the content be used to say something that it is not saying. It's the same way that we're using Photoshop to change pictures to look like something that they are not. So we need to be very careful as Zimbabweans. At the end of the day, what Al Jazeera hopes to achieve is the destruction of your country. They are not happy that Zimbabwe is not falling apart due to sanctions. They are not happy that there's some businessmen that have been investing in Zimbabwe, continuing to grow Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is growing. There is a time not too long ago, you go to Zimbabwe, you put your ATM from a foreign country into the ATM, you could never get any money out. Right now, as I speak to you, you can go to Zimbabwe, put your card into an ATM, US dollars are going to come out. And I want to ask you, where do you think those US dollars are coming from? Because as much as you complain about Zimbabwe being corrupt, most of you keep your money under your mattresses. Most of you keep your money under your couches. So you don't put money into the banking system. These US dollars that you're drawing, where are they coming from? If 15 million Zimbabweans are keeping their money under the mattress, but right now you can go to the ATM and get US dollars out, somebody has been putting those US dollars in the bank. And guess who it is? It is the very same investors, very same people that are dealing in gold, very same people who've got legal gold mining licenses, and business people like Rutland that are putting money into the system so that you can withdraw money and have a functional banking system for the first time in 20 years. That for me is progress. But that progress makes a lot of people unhappy. The mining industry is driving the economy of Zimbabwe. It's growing that economy. We're seeing a boom in construction, a boom in the purchase and buying of cement, bricks, tiles, you name it, because people are constructing, people are building. Many Zimbabweans cannot afford to buy a house in Zimbabwe because it has become so expensive. And the reason it's expensive is because of the activities that have been done. And these activities have been done by these people that are dealing in this gold. They've been done by pastors like Pastor Hubert Angel, who has been looking for investment, courting investment. He is this charming person. He's got a lot of flowery language because he's a salesman, trying to sell the country, trying to get people into Zimbabwe. Those are the people that have made sure that that economy has got investment, has got money that is keeping our miners mining. The money from mining goes into construction. From construction, it goes into agriculture. From agriculture, it produces the bumper harvest that you're seeing. And from that, it goes into the real estate. It is totally affecting the whole economy. The Americans are not happy with that. The IMF is not happy with the gold coins that we came up with because they can see us starting to turn our currency into a gold-backed currency. A currency that has real power. But if our currency has power and the Americans just have paper money, they're not going to be happy with that. That's part and parcel of why you see Al Jazeera coming in, trying to demonize our investors and trying to make sure that they can be held down or held to ransom and their assets taken by anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism laws. And let me tell you something that most Zimbabweans don't know. In 2002, 3 reports were written, one by Africa Research Consulting, another one by The Maverick, and there's another one by Sentry. All these reports implicated our biggest billionaires. It targeted Kudata Gure, it targeted Rutland, it targeted the military of Zimbabwe, targeted the government of Zimbabwe. And the intention of those reports was that in October of 2022, and this is 2022 is the year I'm talking about, the intention was for the Financial Action Task Force that was going to be reviewing Zimbabwe's grey listing in October to blacklist the Zimbabwean economy. They didn't just want us on the grey list. They wanted us on the blacklist where there's only 2 other countries, Iran and North Korea. But fortunately for them, the United Nations human rights counselor, or the United Nations Special Rapporteur came to Zimbabwe. They did their research in Zimbabwe, and they established that there were sanctions on Zimbabwe that were blocking legitimate channels to market. And when they discovered that there were legitimate channels or financial channels that were being blocked, she mentioned that because of the blocking of these legitimate channels to the financial market, Zimbabwe had to look for alternative ways to do business. Those alternative ways are what these very same G7 nations that have sanctions on us then call money laundering. So the UN Human Rights Council was the only reason why we never got put on a blacklist. And in fact, we ended up being taken from the grey list. But their intention was to force us onto the blacklist or force the government of Zimbabwe to take action against Kudata Gure and Simon Radland. The government of Zimbabwe did not take action, but the United Nations coming and proving that sanctions close legitimate channels of doing business, something that was confirmed in the very same Al Jazeera documentary by the FBI agent who said we imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe to remove Zimbabwe from the financial system. And she acknowledged that because of doing that, Zimbabwe has had to look for alternative ways, and it has had to look at using gold as a means to try and mitigate those sanctions. So this is about blacklisting our biggest and most powerful business people. They have also implicated in these reports people like Rottenbach and many other business people that keep the Zimbabwean economy functional. We as Zimbabweans have got to fight this. And I want to appeal to certain business people in Zimbabwe, some of them who are on the sanctions list, who are believing that this is the time to grow under these sanctions. And some of them are beginning to frustrate our efforts to fight sanctions. I want to warn you that the enemy that you're playing with is not going to let you prosper. The enemy that you are trying to stop from attacking is going to destroy you. This is why you see them going after Radland. This is why you see them going after Tagwire. This is why you see them going after the economy of Zimbabwe, is to destroy all your businesses. Is to ensure that you can't own the mines that you own. Is to ensure that you can't bring in the resources that you bring into the country. Is to ensure that you don't build the monopolies of the businesses that you're building and that they can be given to American companies. If you don't believe me, simply look at what they did to Libya, to Iraq, to Afghanistan. They destroyed all the local businesses in those countries, and American businesses have taken over. Sanctions might help you to build a monopoly, but they make the nation unstable to the point that one day the people of Zimbabwe will rise up, the people of Zimbabwe will protest, and that will open room for intervention or for civil unrest. That targets your business. So some of you business people that have been sabotaging our fight against sanctions, I challenge you, because Al Jazeera is showing that they will come after you with sanctions. And if you survive the sanctions, if the sanctions make you rich, they will begin to block your accounts and go after your accounts for money laundering. They did it with Bredenkamp. They're starting to do it with Radland, and they're going to do it with even you and the other people that have got businesses and think that they're comfortable in Zimbabwe. The intention of sanctions is warfare. It's to destroy, and it's to take over the economy of Zimbabwe. The mines some of you guys own, the businesses some of you own, the manufacturing concerns that you own, they want to take them and they want to turn them into American-controlled businesses and destroy all the local ownership. So that is what I want to tell Zimbabwe. Be careful. You, the civilians, be careful that this country can be destroyed and you lose everything. Libyans lost everything. Iraqis lost everything. Afghanistanis lost everything. Syrians lost everything. The only countries that stood from American attack is Iraq, Iran, because they are united. Cuba, because they are united. The Venezuelans are united. We Zimbabweans have got to remain united if we want to survive this. And of course, South Africa needs to be careful because ultimately that is who they are targeting as well.